In this video, I want to create a sumProduct function in Power Query where we have 3 input lists that I've already loaded into Power Query. What I want to do is to create the sumProduct of these lists, which if we do that in Excel, we can do it element-wise by using the product function, which will multiply the values together. And then we can do that for each row and sum that, which gives us 131, or we can directly use the sumProduct function, which then takes our arrays and multiplies them together element-wise, meaning the first item of the first array times the first item of the second array times the first item of the third array, and so on. Then it will create the product for the individual rows and sum up the product, so sumProduct. I've intentionally used 3 lists because I want the user to be able to add an arbitrary number of lists and not simply 2 lists. We'll be making a function, and unfortunately we can't make a helper query that we then convert into a function because we can't have parameters that have multiple values inside of the managed parameters. Inside type we can't see list, records, or tables. In other words, multi-value values, meaning we can create the helper query and then manually convert that into a function, but then the two aren't linked together. I want the user to pass in a list of lists, where the inner lists are then the lists that you want to multiply together. We'll start by saying I want a list, and then I'll add in the 3 lists manually, which will then give us the list in each element. Then we want to use List.Zip because we want the first element of the first list and the first element of the second list and so on. And List.Zip conveniently does that. That also takes a list of lists, which is conveniently the values that we have. Now we've already merged them, and we have the first values in the first value. We have the second values in the second value, and so on. And we can call that step zip. And then we want to use the conveniently named List.Product function. Unfortunately, that takes a list, which then means, well, what is our numbers list? We can just say zip and go into the first item, which would then be 56, which we see is what we expect. But we want to do that for each row. We want a function that performs an operation for each row, which conveniently the List.Transform function does for us. If we go back to the previous step, we can say, well, I want to transform this list. How do I want to transform it? I want to use the mentioned List.Product function, which is then applied upon the list, the inner list. And then because List.Transform acts upon the current item, and because List.Product takes one argument, we don't have to write each and the underscore. We can if we want to, but this isn't necessary because it's implied that we're using List.Product upon the current item. And then we can call that product. And finally, we have to sum the list, which conveniently there's also a function for. And then we already have the expected result. We can then convert that into a function by copying it and then giving it a descriptive name. We can't directly rename the first step, but we can go into Advanced Editor and then change it here. To turn this into a function, we can add a let in outside of the current structure. We want a new step called, it doesn't actually matter. This will be a function, so it must take an argument. We can call that input list of lists, which will then go towards. That will produce the custom one step. And then we need to write in again. And we then need to output the A, which is then this step, meaning that the step A is equal to this function, which then outputs A. And then we should probably actually change that. Actually, I want something other than A, but we'll only see the name of the step inside of the actual function. So when you click on func sumProduct, you can then use the function as we're intended to. We pass in a list of lists. It would be nice if it gave me, it doesn't give you intelligence unless you add documentation yourself, which I'm not going to do right now. We can then pass in our list of lists and get back 131 as expected. So